Welcome to week 4 of engineering management class. This week I'm trying something a little bit different. I'm going to divide the instructor video lecture into 2 parts so that you can kind of jump in and out, and that way they'll be shorter and a little bit easier and quicker for you to get through. So this week we're going to talk about the organizing aspect of management. Remember, we had our 4 functions. Last week we spent time on planning and strategy. We came up with a good plans, supposedly. So now we have to figure out, okay, within our organizations, now that we have a plan for a successful organization and company, how do we implement that? So we're in the implementation phase here, and we have to kind of figure out how to best organize everything for optimal performance. Another way to look at it is think of yourself as a small business person. Maybe you started a company and it was just you. You might have hired 1 or 2 people along the way, and it became successful, and you grew and grew, and then all of a sudden you were too big for you to be able to have oversight of everything. In the past, you oversaw all aspects of the business because it was just you, and it was small enough for you to be able to do that. Now you can't possibly, as one person, have oversight over all of the various activities and functions and business activities that are happening in a larger organization. So you kind of have to figure out, okay, how do I organize and structure my company? So there are a couple of ways that you can, or several ways actually, that you can do this. And so we want to look at not just the actual job functions, the work itself, but also we want to look at how decisions are made and the flow of communication and power and authority. So here we are with our 4 management functions of management, and you can see here the organizing one is about creating structures. So how are we going to divide that work? How are we going to delegate out our resources and coordinate activities? So I am sharing with you a definition of organizational structure. And again, this is what the structure for our organization that we're going to put in place. And it's from a different source, but I really like it, so I brought it in to share with you. Division of labor and patterns of coordination, communication, workflow, and formal power that direct organizational activities. I think that kind of sums it up really well. And there are a number of ways, again, that you can do this. But before we choose the structure that we want, we need to consider a few things. So first of all, in the upper right corner of this diagram, you see the term span of control. That's really about how many people each manager supervises. And depending on the type of business and the industry you're in, that will be different than it will for other industries. Do you want to organize it around departments? Is that something that would work well for you, your leadership management style, but as well for the company and the type of business you do? And then the 2 at the bottom are really interesting. They're, number 1, how formalized you want your structure to be. In other words, is it highly regulated with rules and protocols that must be followed? Or is it more innovative and creative? Centralization has to do with the formal power structure. So a company that's highly centralized means that power rests with the person at the top and flows down, and that those at the top make the decisions. Decentralization is pushing it down to those who are closer to the customer or the final product. So here's sort of a visual example of what span of control might look like. And you can see that the person at the top, the CEO, president, owner, or whatever, only has a few people reporting to her or him, and that's very common. When you get to where the actual work is done, then you may have more people. If the work that employees are doing is fairly routine and doesn't require a lot of interaction with a manager, then that manager can actually supervise more people. And then, of course, the opposite would be true. Centralization and decentralization that I just spoke of is really about who's making decisions. So an example might be Oregon Tech. So Oregon Tech's first and primary campus, main campus, has been Klamath Falls, and that's where our president and provost reside. But we also have other campuses. So if the administration decided to make this a very highly centralized organization, then decisions for all campuses would be made at Klamath Falls by those in power at the top, and those to whom they delegate that power and authority to. If instead the administration said, well, we are one university, but at the same time we serve different markets and different types of students, and so students, say, maybe in Wilsonville are different than students at Klamath Falls, and maybe we should push some of that decision making down to the local level where they can best serve those students. And that would be a more decentralized. So your book talks a little bit about this, and it makes sense. And then I mentioned formalization. Some industries that have a lot of safety issues that they need to be cognizant of have very formal processes in place. I know in healthcare, it's not just, we don't get creative when patient down, call 911. We have very specific rules and protocols that we follow, and we don't deviate or people die. So you can have an organization that's very highly formalized because of the type of work or industry it's in, or it could just be the preference of those in charge. And if that's the case, then they really are not highly involved in change initiatives. And so you see these in more, we used to see this in former organizations more in the 20th century, but as we've moved into a very fast-paced environment and marketplace, we're seeing that's breaking down because it's slowing things down. You get a lot of standardization of work, but you also get a slowing down of the process sometimes. And I mentioned that sometimes as companies grow, they like to divide their company into departments, and these can be by function or could be geographic. And a lot, again, depends on your mission, what your company is, what your objectives and goals are, and what type of business you're in. So, but again, by setting these structures up, it determines that chain of command and how authority and decision-making and communication flows. So a wide variety. Some of you who've been out in the workforce already may have seen the matrix structure. We've seen this more in the technology industry. Because it's very project-based, and we'll talk a little bit more about it when we get into the chapters on project management. But basically, and particularly as possibly an engineer, you may be assigned to a product, or a project, in which maybe it's a new product development, but you also report to the engineering manager or the production manager, depending on what department you're in. So you have your departmental manager that you report to, and then you have the project manager that you report to. So you have two bosses. Now, the reason that this type of structure was established was to kind of cut through red tape so that a new product could be rolled out faster. And you didn't have to, go to your boss and went to his boss or her boss and the next boss and the next boss to get an answer, and then all the way back down. Just kind of cut through all that. And if your competitors are quick to market, you need to be as well. The downfall is you have two bosses, and of course they each feel their needs are greater than the other boss. An interesting more virtual type of organization is called a network organization. And this is where you in the center are the core firm. And you may have a very stripped down business in terms of employees or exactly what you do in your location. And you may contract out to other organizations and locations for the various functions of your business. So you might have, your Your marketing department, you may outsource that to a company in New York City. Your production may be outsourced to a company in Mexico, et cetera. And so you can see then that you could create a fairly complicated business with a very small number of people. The skills involved in this, though, are relationship skills and the ability to work with and manage those relationships, negotiation skills in terms of negotiating excellent contracts, but also then nurturing those relationships so that they continue and that you don't have problems down the road. And along the lines of all of those types of structures we're talking about, there's a movement away from more mechanistic structuring of organizations to a more organic structure. And you can see what some of those characteristics look like. And why is that? So organic means that it's decision-making and that sort of thing is pushed down to the level where the action's happening, either where you're meeting the customer or the product's being made. And when you think about it, the person who's actually constructing something probably knows better what needs to happen than somebody sitting in an office who hasn't been out on the floor for a really long time. So it's empowering your employees to really be part of the entire process and sharing ideas. There's a lot of sharing, learning, and innovation that happens in more organic structures. And again, this is where our competitive marketplace is pushing us to move towards, so that we can turn out more high quality work as well as turn it out a little bit faster. So an organizational design is just the entire process of designing and creating this. And again, we want to tie it back to your company's mission. Okay, so everything should be in alignment, and that is so that your strategy, your structure, your culture are all aligned, whether it's organic or mechanistic. And speaking of mechanistic, I just wanted to bring up the idea of bureaucracy, which is actually came about in during the Industrial Revolution, because as companies grew and factories grew, they needed a way to organize things. And so they created, Max Weber is often given credit for the idea of a bureaucracy, and creating an organizational structure that's based on authority and very logical order. And you can see that it's very formal, there are rules, it's a hierarchical type of system in which authority rests in that hierarchy. But what's happened over the years is it's lost sight of its original design, which was to create efficiency. And often we see bloated bureaucracies, and I think that's where it is often now frowned upon as a term and has a negative connotation. But actually used in the way it was designed, it's not that bad. Okay, so lastly, our environment is going to determine whether we design in a more mechanistic system or an organic system, and how adaptive we need to be. So when I'm talking about our competitors, I'm really talking about adapting to the world in which we're competing and working today. So contemporary organizations tend to be moving, as I mentioned, towards a little bit more organic with fewer levels of management and shorter chains of command, meaning flattening that organization and allowing more movement, sharing of ideas, that sort of thing, empowerment of employees. The outcome of this seems to be that organizations are becoming actually very efficient and effective at what they do. And so contrary to the concerns originally, where a lack of oversight in terms of control by authority would create problems, it's actually been just the opposite. Okay, I'm going to stop right there, and thank you for this part. In the next section, part 2, I'm going to talk a little bit about the human resource aspect of organizing, what that means, and that sort of thing. So I'll see you in a few minutes when you watch the next one. Thank you.